Hey everyone, John with People's Republic here. As you can see, no arena today. No gameplay at all. I've always wanted to do some video essays in addition to my draft videos, and that desire, combined with an urge to use this tiny platform of mine to speak out against racism and police brutality, inspired me to make this as a message in solidarity with black people across this nation, as well as hopefully some fun and informative Magic-related content. So, with no further ado, let's get to that content. A completely subjective collection of my favorite black characters in this game we so love. I settled on a top 10, but as we go through, keep in mind this is meant to be about appreciation, and is totally based on my opinion. Everyone relates to and likes characters based on their own preferences, so try not to get your jimmies rustled by my picks. Also, when it comes to talking about cards representing Planeswalkers, I'm going to skip over those from Planeswalker decks as they aren't super relevant for most players. First up is an honorable mention for Eutropia, whose first and only appearance so far was in the recent Theros Beyond Death. This is a character for whom we don't have many details, but I believe the incredible art by Sarah Winters and neat take on Constellation earned this twice-favored wizard a nod. Speaking of twice-favored, that's what we do know about Eutropia in terms of the lore. She is favored not by just one of the Therosian gods, but two. As per her flavor text, Nylea speaks to her in the windblown leaves, Thassa in the rushing tides. That gives us the impression that Eutropia is deeply in tune with nature, and her upward gaze and reverent pose show her great devotion to her two patrons. Card design-wise, this uncommon legendary was a powerful piece in green-blue Constellation Limited decks, doing an impression of Rivals of Ixalan rare Hadana's Climb by making creatures bigger and granting them evasion. And to top it all off, blue-green is consistently my favorite two-color combination to play, so it's safe to say she was on the shortlist from the beginning. Kicking off the list proper is someone I bet you didn't see coming. It's Pyr, Imaginative Rascal. Unfortunately, this is another character for whom we don't have much published story, but the flavor of a wily youngster from Kylum and his imaginary friend, blue legendary and partner Toothy, going to battle in Valor's Reach is just such a home run, I couldn't resist. We have at least this much to go on. He's the resourceful sort, having cobbled together some semblance of armor and scrapping it out with, well, a battlemate that may or may not really exist. Their mechanics play beautifully off each other, with Pyr doubling the +1/+1 counters that Toothy accrues with each card that its controller draws. While we're unlikely to see another version of him printed in a standard legal product, the idea of a blue-green commander deck centered on counters with the two-card engine of Pyr and his partner makes me want to brew. And with regards to other potential versions, a Battlebond 2 seems like a definite possibility, and a teenage Pyr with a further evolved Toothy would be a welcome sight. Number 9 is Etrata, a vampire and master spy of Ravnica's House Dimir. Despite only having one appearance so far, there's a lot to love. She's known to be fashionable, because even when your job is sneaking around and not being seen, you do want to look good in the instance that someone does actually catch a glance. She's also cold to the point of being characterized as nihilistic, but this doesn't mean she doesn't have aspirations. Specifically, she's coming for Lazav and the leadership of House Dimir. See, Etrata is of the opinion that the shadowy shapeshifter and his modes of operation are outdated and in need of an overhaul. Of course, finding and killing Lazav is probably easier said than done, but her reputation as an assassin that seemingly never misses her target makes it seem possible that she could accomplish the impossible. Taking a look at her printed card, blue-black rare Etrata the Silencer from Guilds of Ravnica, we've got a beautiful combination of flavor and power. She can't be blocked, virtually guaranteeing that her second ability can go off each time she attacks, and thus her mark gets taken out. She then retreats to the library to get the details on her next assignment, and you wash, rinse, and repeat until the game is over. Kaineos, a legendary ruler of the Therosian polis of Miletus alongside his partner Tiro, gets the 8th spot. While I can see the argument that Wizards choosing to make one of Magic's first openly gay characters also happen to be black smacks a bit of tokenism and wanting to score the twofer, I think that when we look at what we know of these two and their popularity with many, many fans, We have a fantastic example of representation and normalization that the game can only use more of. We first saw a hint at Kaineos and his counterpart on Theros' common artifact creature, Guardians of Meletus, the flavor text of which mentioned a pair commonly assumed to be feuding rulers who were actually peaceful lovers. Then, Commander 2016 brought us the 4-color legendary creature depicting both of these noble men and alluding a bit more to their history. They overthrew the immortal Archon Agnomachos, and with the blessing of Ephara, established Meletus, and were chosen by the people as its guardians. Of note, this is based on the real-world tale of the ancient Athenian lovers Harmodius and Aristogeiton, who assassinated the tyrant Hipparchus in the 6th century BCE. The card itself is the perfect centerpiece to a group hug style commander deck, giving everyone extra land drops and cards while also providing a fantastic blocker on the ground and a wide swath of deck construction options via their color identity. To boot, the art is a beautiful piece by William Murray, showing Kaineos gazing over the polis as the sun begins to go down, Tyros standing beside him firmly, hand on his partner's neck in affection and support. Stuff like this helps me feel confident that my game of choice is really the best in the world. It may not be my identity shown here, but that doesn't make it any less valid or worth showcasing. Indeed, it makes me want to share its powerful message with everyone that I can. Next up, we've got a denizen of the plane of Amonkhet, Hapatra. As Magic's take on Cleopatra, she's every bit the regal, intelligent, and slightly sinister woman you'd expect. She is a vizier of the god Ronus, or at least was until the Scorpion God did him in, but embodies his main trait of strength not so much in a sense of physical might, but more along the lines of strength of will and the natural potency of poisons. Her main role during her time serving Ronus was to tend to the basilisk, which lurks in the expanse of Ronus' monument and is central in the trial of strength. In the story, she briefly meets Chandra and Nyssa, and strikes the latter as sharing some traits with Ravnica's Lavinia. She also helps train and prepare initiates, sometimes going so far as to coat their weapons in venom for extra effect. Her only current printing as a card, the rare legendary Vizier of Poisons, is an awesome payoff for the black-green decks of the Amonkhet Limited format, which primarily played with -1/-1 counters and various secondary effects that would trigger when those counters were placed. Getting to place those counters whenever your creatures connect, possibly killing your opponent's creatures, and creating 1/1 Death Touch snakes while you're at it, is a way to completely devastate the opponent. Sprinting into the 6th spot is Samut, another Amonkhet native, but this time a planeswalker. She has quite a bit of interesting backstory, including losing her friend Noct during an ill-advised trip outside the Heckma, and as a result, losing her faith in the god Pharaoh and the trials of the gods. She is thus labeled a dissenter, but still manages to both save her best friend Jeru from death at the end of the Trial of Zeal, with Gideon's intervention, and make a plea to Hazaret to remember the time before the god Pharaoh. Not long after, the Hours begin, and she is charged with protecting Noctimune's survivors. Her spark ignites when she saves Hazaret from the Scorpion God. From there, the end of the Amonkhet block story, we didn't see her again until War of the Spark, when she was drawn to Ravnica by the interplanar beacon. Considering she was forced to fight against the inhabitants of her own plane now eternalized and controlled by Nicol Bolas, it's much more personal to her. She travels through the portal to Amonkhet to help close the bridge from the other side and stop the invasion, meets Sarkhan and Hazaret, and the latter lends her spear to assist in the fight against Bolas. Later, once the war is won, she attends Gideon's memorial service on Theros, and then returns to Amonkhet, where Hazaret has re-established the Heckma to protect the survivors from the desert. As for the various versions of Samut printed thus far, we have quite the variety. A green-red mythic rare legendary creature with a white activated ability, the Voice of Dissent. A green-red mythic rare planeswalker, the Tested. And a green-red hybrid uncommon planeswalker, the Tyrant Smasher. 2 have involved double strike, either having it or granting it, and 2 have played with haste. None have been particularly popular in competitive play, but there's definitely more space to explore with her designs when we revisit Amonkhet. Holding down number 5 on the list is Koth. A Mirrodin native, he's a member of the Volshok's Hammer tribe, hence his epithet of the Hammer. As a geomancer, he can quite literally move mountains, as well as manipulate rock and metal. His spark originally ignited when his people fell into open war, but dealing with that infighting was nothing compared to the trials he faced during the Scars of Mirrodin block story. Koth's first planeswalk was to Dominaria, specifically the Isle of Urborg, where he found Elspeth and, with some cajoling, recruited her to help in the fight against the Phyrexians taking over Mirrodin. The 2 of them found Venser, and through some rather brutal tactics, think encasing Venser's head in a stone mask and forcing him to planeswalk to Mirrodin, also convinced him to assist. As the trio learned more of the plane's dire threat and experienced some close calls with the Nim and Tezzeret, they also successfully rescued and befriended Malira, a Sylvok outcast who was both immune to Phyresis and able to cure the effects of Phyrexian oil on Mirrans. Around this time, though, Koth becomes frustrated with their lack of progress towards ending the surface war, kidnaps Malira, and abandons the other 2 walkers, but soon comes back to their rescue and accedes to Venser's insistence that finding Karn is their best hope for salvation. Eventually, they meet the Silver Golem, but despite Venser's sacrifice to restore his spark, Karn can only urge them to unite the Mirrans in resistance. Of course, we all know that the plan fails and New Phyrexia is born in Mirrodin's place, but all is not lost. Koth escapes into the furnace layers of the plane with the other Mirran survivors, and there is still some hope they can overcome the Phyrexians someday. Anyway, on to Koth's printed versions. We have just Koth of the Hammer, originally printed in Scars of Mirrodin at Mythic Rare and also reprinted in a dual deck. It's a rock solid, pun intended, mono-red planeswalker that lets its controller turn mountains into 4/4s, add a boatload of red mana, or ultimate to turn mountains into pingers permanently with an emblem. It's a commander staple and a bomb level card in mini cubes, not to mention a fan favorite. At 4 is the regal and stately Linden Kenrith, Queen of Ardenvale and a knight of each of Eldraine's royal courts save the red-aligned Embereth. She is the wife of the High Ruler of the Realm, King Alginus Kenrith, stepmother of the planeswalking brother-sister pair, Will and Rowan, and mother of Prince Eric and Princess Hazel. In her young adulthood, Linden was actually pitted against her future husband as one of the 2 candidates for high rulership of the plane. During their quests, Alginus becomes enthralled with a witch, who mothers and then kills Will and Rowan, but Linden restores them to life and adopts them as her own. In the end, a cured Alginus achieves his 5th knighthood before she does and ascends to the throne, but not without Linden at his side. Linden's printed card, Throne of Eldraine rare Linden, the Steadfast Queen, was seen as the weakest of its cycle of monocolored legends, but it has seen some niche standard play in white life gain decks alongside Heliod the Sun-Crowned. Not being a great fit for competitive play shouldn't be the only way we evaluate here, of course. Personally, I think it's an interesting take on what a mono-white legend can look like, and it might be a part of some version of White Weenie to come. Please hold your instinctive gut reactions as I announce that number 3 on this list is Teferi. Yes, multiple recent printings dominating Standard have made him more of a heel than a hero, but the truth is that this blue-aligned Chronarch is really, well, pretty dope. I'm gonna get a little hand-wavy about Teferi's more distant history because it is both dense and lengthy, but there are some important details to be mentioned before we get to the current storyline. First, he cut his teeth at the one and only Tolarian Academy, where he rubbed elbows with Urza and befriended Jorah, Karn, and Baron. He first gained his spark after he'd become a royal mage of his home nation of Zalfir and started his first time experiments, though he did not know he was a planeswalker at the time. He eventually delegated his civic duties to others and left to conduct more research on the appropriately named Teferi's Isle. He managed to really muck up the time streams, starting a conflict among his contemporaries Mangara, Jolrael, and Kaervek. Then, during the Phyrexian invasion, he managed to royally piss off Urza by phasing out the northwestern portion of the Jamaran supercontinent as well as a chunk of Shiv. This protected him and his friend Jorah, but left Dominaria with 2 fewer powerful allies. It wasn't for another 300 years that Teferi and Jorah would return to their home plane, but they were unable to accomplish their goal of phasing the lands and their people back in before a battle with Nicol Bolas erupted, and Teferi was forced to sacrifice his spark to protect and restore Shiv. With the crisis averted, Teferi sought new purpose in life and found it in starting a family, marrying the caravan drover Subira, and with her having a daughter, Niambi. From here, we can pick up with the lore of the lauded Dominaria set of 2018, which brought the Gatewatch to the plane and saw Teferi's spark return to him with a power stone crafted by Jorah. He makes his own oath to the group, and joins them on Ravnica to aid in the war against Bolas. He succeeds in slowing the Eternals' invasion with his time magic, and after attending the plane-wide celebration and Gideon's memorial service, returns to Dominaria with Karn and Ajani to look into helping the Mirren resistance. Now, on to the cards, 3 of which I'm fairly sure you're quite familiar with, but 2 from earlier years that you may have only seen a few times. First, there was the blue legendary creature from Time Spiral, Teferi, Mage of Zalfir, which was reprinted in Iconic Masters and plays into his theme of time magic by giving your cards flash and locking your opponents out of instant speed effects. Then, he got his first actual Planeswalker card in Commander 2014 with the mono-blue Teferi Temporal Archmage, which besides being eligible to be your commander, is a powerful card advantage engine in its own right. Of course, Dominaria brought us a card we all love to hate due to its dominance and high power level, blue-white mythic rare Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Whether he was harmlessly ticking up and drawing cards, or busy tucking himself into your deck in an infinite loop, it was a powerhouse in standard control decks. And speaking of powerhouses, they did it again with War of the Sparks blue-white rare Teferi Time Raveler, which is an automatic 1-for-1 that demands an answer and can shut down entire archetypes built on instant speed interaction. Finally, coming in Core Set 2021 is Teferi Master of Time, and while the jury is still out on how much of an impact this one will make, it's definitely spicy as the first Planeswalker that can use loyalty abilities at instant speed, and thus twice per turn cycle, a nod to phasing, and potentially another control deck staple. Taking aim and shooting straight to number 2 is Vivien Reid. This fierce huntress may have only been introduced a couple years ago, but she has made her presence known in the lore and competitive scene, and as a poised, lethal planeswalker with an affinity for badass beasts, her appeal is broad. Vivien hails from Scala, which underwent years of turmoil as the advanced Nura encroached on the natural lands of Reid's shamanic Smaragdi people. Eventually, things went from bad to worse as good old Nicol Bolas showed up, learned what he could from the Nura, and began to destroy the whole plane. This forced the Nura and Smaragdi to work together, and they managed to create the Arcbow, a weapon containing an invocation of every creature that had ever lived on the plane before all was lost, at which time Vivien's spark ignited, and she planeswalked away with the Arcbow. After a brief stop on Ixalan, where she took great offense to some animal cruelty in the vampire city of Luno, and subsequently unleashed their entire menagerie of captive dinosaurs to effectively destroy the place, Vivien ended up drawn to Ravnica by the interplanar beacon. As it was for Samut, the battle against Bolas was personal for her. She was part of the 4 Planeswalker strike team that attempted to assassinate Liliana, and while they failed and Liliana obviously turned against Bolas in the end, Vivien still regards her as a threat and enemy in the wake of the war. From there, she worked with Vraska in tracking Dovin Bond back to Kaladesh, but the pair lost the Vedalken's trail. Most recently, she's been heavily involved in the conflicts of Ikoria, She suspects that the Ozolith is being controlled by an unnamed planeswalker, and that's why it has been causing such unusual mutations, bondings, and monster attacks. She fights alongside Luca at first in a battle for control of the Ozolith, but when the Coppercoat goes mad with the crystal's power and begins to take advantage of the plane's creatures, she and the Bonders of the plane join with the humans at Drannith and defeat him, prompting him to overload and destroy the Ozolith and quickly planeswalk away. Now, as for Vivien's cards, we've seen 4 versions appearing in boosters, all of them mono-green, and each has made a splash. The mythic rare Vivien Reid from Core Set 2019 got plenty of action in black-green Explorer decks of its standard format, and it provides card selection and the ability to destroy pesky artifacts, enchantments, and flyers. Vivien, Champion of the Wilds, a rare in War of the Spark, was the next we saw, and while it's been more of a niche player, the versatility of casting creatures as though they had flash, along with a way to find more creatures off the top of the deck, can lead to some game-swinging scenarios. Core Set 2020 brought Vivien Arcbow Ranger, which is arguably her most powerful version, but also the most difficult to cast, at 1 and 3 green. Stacking counters on your beaters when you're ahead, or using them to knock off opponents' creatures when you're behind, she's tailor-made for mono-green stompy decks, not to mention not far away from her Silver Bullet fetching ultimate as soon as she resolves. And last but not least, we've got Vivien, Monsters Advocate from Ikoria Lair of Behemoths, which gives Arcbow Ranger a real run for its money, providing additional 3/3 bodies on the battlefield, card selection off the top of the library, and a cascade effect at -2. Materializing in to take the honor of the top spot is the Ghost Assassin herself, Kaya. As if her gorgeous natural hair and do-as-I-please attitude weren't enough to make fans fall in love, she's had a fascinating and critical role in the story recently that we need to explore. Though she is originally from the plane of Tulvata, we first met Kaya during her dabblings on the world of Fiora, where she offs the ghostly King Brago as part of a contract she takes from Queen Marquesa. After that, she resurfaces on Ravnica, where she's taken the job of killing the Obsidian from none other than Nicol Bolas. With help from Ral Zarek, Vraska, and the Rakdos emissary Hekara, Kaya infiltrates Orzhova and makes short work of the Ghost Council. Unfortunately, this has the unexpected consequence of making her the new guildmaster, and she struggles with the weight of the many Orzhov contracts. She frees many from their debts, but has to raise tithes on Ravnican's incomes to make up for the lost revenue, which results in riots and the end of a partnership with Teysa Karlov. With the help of the advocate Tomek Vrona, she manages to silence her critics within the guild and get Teysa locked up, which allows her to assist Ral with activating the interplanar beacon. Of course, this is part of Bolas' plan, and once Kaya sees his treachery for what it is, she defects from his side for good and teams up with Teo Virata and Aretha Shokta, aka Rat, to recruit the Selesnya, Gruul, Golgari, and Rakdos for the side of the Gatewatch. Once the war is eventually won, Kaya officially joins the Gatewatch and accepts the charge of assassinating Liliana from the Guildmasters as penance for her temporary service to Bolas. Teo and Rat stick by her for the new mission, and after a short stop on Gobakan, the trio head to Dominaria with Jaya Ballard to find their mark. Ends up, Liliana is dealing with another problem. An imposter has taken control of her manor. Ves agrees to let Kaya kill her if the Ghost Assassin will first deal with the imposter, but that individual has control of the Jinn Zahid, and a battle ensues. Liliana subdues Zahid with the Chain Veil, and instead of letting him take the imposter for his own revenge, Kaya kills the woman out of mercy, and the Jinn is left empty-handed. Afterwards, Kaya spares Liliana, taking the Chain Veil as proof of the kill, and promising to meet her on Fiora. There, Kaya, Teo, and Rat agree to help Liliana, now going by Ana Iora, on her path to redemption, and the four head to Tulvata. With us all up to speed on the lore, let's take a look at Kaya's 3 printed versions. First was black-white mythic rare Kaya, Ghost Assassin, in Conspiracy Take the Crown. Her unique Zero ability turned heads as an alternative way to deal with a threat for a turn, while her minus abilities allow her controller to gain good value in life swings and cards. In Ravnica Allegiance, we had another black-white mythic, Kaya Orzhov Usurper, which again has some pretty different abilities for a planeswalker, exiling both cards from graveyards with her plus and small permanents from the battlefield with her minus. While it sees only niche play in the current standard environment, it's a fresh take on what a black-white walker can do. And most recently, in War of the Spark, we got the much more straightforward black-white hybrid uncommon Kaya Bane of the Dead, which does just what you'd expect a Ghost Assassin to do: wipe opposing creatures off the board with a permanent exile effect. And with that, we've reached the end of this list. I hope you enjoyed learning more about some of Magic's awesome black characters, and I want to encourage you to take the time to appreciate the diversity in our game each time you sit down to play a match, build a deck, or even browse through Scryfall. The truth of the matter is that Wizards as a company and we as a community still have a remarkable ways to go in terms of representation, respect, and equality for people of different races, gender norms, physical ability, and outward appearance. What we can hope, though, is that by cherishing these depictions, advocating for more, and fostering the most inclusive and welcoming environment we can make progress in not just our own little slice of society, but the world as a whole. I'll mention here the links to great charities and funds in the video description, and I hope you'll consider donating a portion of your monthly Magic budget to one or more of them. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. Stay safe, love each other, and remember, Black Lives Matter.